period of time that is relatively short, but allows for the construction of more enduring links that will be put on hold while remaining available. That's what's the name of the work and learning network, right? Is thus a temporary pocket of accumulation, creating value, and provides a base for the requirement of extending the network by further connections. Networking, right? So, in terms of exploitation and the relationship to exclusion, in a world so constructed as to be entirely subject to network logic, there is no reason to pose the question of justice, because those of low status who can be very precisely characterized in such a framework as excluded tend to disappear without trace. So that's the impetus to focus on exclusion. Exploitation was predominantly exploitation through labor, but exclusion refers in the main to various forms of expulsion from the spheres of work relations. And so therefore, exploitation becomes the blind spot in the whole discourse. And if we look at, for example, a book by Leslie McCall called Complex Inequality, it's called Gender, Class, Race in the New Economy. And if we look at what's identified as the exclusions, gender, race, but class is redefined as credentials. So we don't even talk about class anymore in the sense we talk about credential exclusion. So what happens to exploitation? Well, exclusion originally emerged to identify those who were left out of the market, the homeless, I guess we'd call them today, living in shanty towns. And eventually it was co-opted and it became a description not even connected now with the market except in terms of labor market attachment. Now, within networks then, there identifies two kinds of networkers. A good one, a good person, and a bad person. The good person is called the network extender, the person who uses the accumulation of resources to develop the network and in a sense communally distribute the advantages that are gained there. Whereas the networker is the person who succeed in the world through their use of qualities only to serve their own personal interests in selfish and even cynical manner. And the success of the networker benefits him alone, whereas the network extender's attainment of better conditions benefits the whole city and is thus a common good. So in terms of social capital, when it started to articulate analysis, identification of economic and human capital, it was seen that social capital in terms of these relations was provided the preconditions for the valorization in both economic capital and for human capital. And so these relations in a network create what are called structural holes. And these holes, as in HOLES, become places where you have advantages. If you can fill the hole, which is a space between different cliques, so that gives you a certain power because you mediate between the different cliques, but the cliques can't communicate with each other without you. So the notion of what we might call sometimes the cultural broker, the broker that comes in, there's tremendous profits to be gained from seeking out these brokerage positions, and they call that person the key holder. So in that process of key holding, the primary form of exploitation is based on the distinction between mobility and immobility. So it's the stars who circulate and move who are not accountable or under surveillance, but those who are the grunts, let's say in the departments or wherever you're working in a particular corporation or in the university, who has to do the work on the ground that has to be produced. And if that wasn't produced, the whole system would fall apart. So there's a lack of compensation to the stars of the system as they move about, gaining, accumulating profits from their social contacts that isn't redistributed. So, 1 minute. To give one example in terms of this kind of exploitation and how it articulates with other forms of exploitation, I don't have time to go into that. I just drew the example of James Basile. I don't know if he's now in the top 10 of the richest people in Canada. He's one of the guys who invented BlackBerry and with the RIM Corporation. And he's highly networked, and he's a promoter of this. His key ideologue is Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you heard of Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book like Blink and Tipping Point, and he brings them in. And so they have a lot of discussions with each other. They're also linked to Bill Gates. Bill Gates goes into the University of Waterloo in that London area, which is the leading business faculties. And what was interesting is Basile over the last couple of years just set up the New School for International Affairs, which he was able to, in that process, get money from the McGuinty government to be able to facilitate this new institution, which he then opened up, and he, I guess like the hockey business or like the entertainment industry, went for the star, which was Homer Dixon, who was at the University of Toronto, and then he signed a big contract and went over to London, for the University of Waterloo. And I forget, I don't know, it doesn't say how much and in celebration of it, they invited a bunch of rock stars to the celebration, and Vasily and the University of Waterloo entertained the crowds, so to speak. So there's a good example of a cluster of networks cutting across entertainment industry, business, academe, and authorship within the publishing industry, and profits gained from it. So would be one example.